This is now my third time recording my June monthly wrap up, and I want to tell you why. The first time I recorded it, I was just rushed. I was trying to do it in between things, so I decided to re-record it. Then I was happy with it. And then, before I could edit it, I saw a TikTok that made me pause. And I'm really annoyed because I scrolled past it after watching it because I was annoyed by it. And so I didn't even save it. I don't know who the person was, but it really challenged me. The TikTok basically said that as an author, you really shouldn't be publishing negative reviews of books on your channels because no matter how honest you think you're being or whatever, those are your colleagues and it's not professional. And I felt really defensive when I first watched this because I have been publishing these monthly wrap-ups and reading challenges and book reviews on this channel since I started it almost 2 years ago. And I have always prided myself on being really honest, very subjective. I never say that something is objectively bad. I never say that something is objectively not worth your time. I know that negative reviews can often be as good of marketing as positive reviews. I have had several books that I've loved that I only picked up because the way someone described it in a negative review made me know that I would like it. So I try to do the same for other people. Because I'm so intentional about that, I really reeled against this idea at first and was like, I just don't think that's very fair. And then I started to think about how I would feel if I were to meet another author. And when I think about growing in community with other authors, when I think about the people I'm becoming friends with and the wide variety of types of books that they write, I will probably like them in the sense that I know how hard my friends worked on them and I can appreciate them, but some of them might not be to my taste. I still don't want to talk badly about them. The point that this TikTok was trying to make and where I've landed over the last couple of weeks since watching it is that every author is just a colleague I haven't met yet. And what a shame it would be to form community with people whose work I have trashed in the past. And trashed is a strong word because I don't think I trash books, but it didn't sit well with me when I started thinking about it. So thank you to the person who made that TikTok. I don't remember who you are, but if I find out, I will add a credit in the description because it's really made me think about the way that I approach these. So I'm going to change the way I do my monthly wrap-ups moving forward. I am still going to tell you all of the books that I read, but I'm not going to give their ratings. I'm not going to tell you which ones I didn't like. I'm only going to talk to you about my top books. Most months where I've read sort of 6 to 8 plus books in the month, I will probably talk to you about my top 3 just because that's a nice number. But if I've read fewer books in the month, it might be a fewer number that I talk about. And this month I'm going to start with that where I read 8 books, but I'm only going to talk to you about my top 3 that I am so excited to talk about. But first, as always, I am going to tell you about the books that I pre-ordered that arrived in June. The first one of those is Hits Different by Tasha Ghouri. If you don't know who Tasha is, she is one of the finalists from Love Island from a few years ago.
Basically, she's told the guys that I sucked her tits or whatever. Licked her tit or whatever. And before it comes out of anyone else, I wanted to tell you.
I actually really have liked Tasha. I don't follow a lot of the Love Island people at all. I don't even watch the show anymore, but you know how a lot of them come out and they have these Boohoo or Pretty Little Thing collabs that they do. Tasha came out with an eBay collab to promote secondhand fashion. And I just feel like a lot of the choices that she's made are unapologetically the vibe of someone who has gone on Love Island, but also conscious in a way that I think a lot of them maybe aren't. And when I saw her debut novel, it was no different. And the reason for that is because the ghostwriter is credited on the cover of the book. Now, if you don't know, the way ghostwriting typically works, and all of these celebrity written books are ghostwritten in some form or fashion, even if it's done together, they will have someone that they're working with to write the book. A ghostwriter is typically paid a flat fee, and most of the time the author will just thank them in the acknowledgments as a collaborator or something like that. Lizzie Huxley Jones is co-author on the cover of this book. What this probably means is that she's getting royalties off this book. And that is a far more ethical way to work with ghostwriters, and it's very rare within the industry. So seeing that, despite the fact that this is a YA rom-com, and I'm not usually the biggest contemporary YA fan, I still wanted to buy this because I really wanted to support that happening. And I am interested to read it. And the second book that arrived this month is To a Darker Shore by Leanne Schwartz. And this is a fantasy novel about a fat neurodivergent woman. Couldn't tell you why that sounded interesting to me. It's a mystery. And I had one other book that I wanted to show you that has arrived, which technically arrived in the month of July, but there's no chance that I'm waiting until my next wrap up to show you. And that is the paperback for my book, You've Got Chainmail, which is out on the 15th of August. Focus, focus. I love this cover so much. I've said it before, but it was designed by an incredible designer named Margarita Abatino. I'll leave a link to her profile in the description, but I'm obsessed with this. If you haven't pre-ordered it yet, the links are in the description as they always are. Out on the 15th of August. I think the ebook's actually out on the 13th of August, so if you're an ebook reader, you might get a couple extra days of excitement. And now I want to talk to you about the 8 books that I read in June, and as discussed, I'm actually only going to talk to you about 3 of them, but I want to tell you all of the ones that I read, so I'm going to put them on the screen here. These are all of the books that I read, and my third favorite book that I read this month that I want to talk to you about is Fable by Adrienne Young. Fable is about a young woman named Fable who lives on this very intense island where her father has abandoned her 4 years prior, and the island seems to be very like survival heavy. Like she's constantly having to like watch her back, where she sleeps at night, hide all of her stuff in different places so that people don't find it. And Fable is a diver? I can't remember what they call her. It's been a few weeks since I read this. But essentially she dives down to the reefs and harvests gemstones from these reefs. And some of these gemstones have lots of value. She also seems to have some kind of magical ability to find and identify these gemstones. But very early on in the book, she has to leave this island because of a near fatal encounter with one of the other people on the island, and she takes refuge on a ship that she has traded with consistently for the 4 years prior. And she decides that she's going to get passage to the city where she knows her father is and confront him about having abandoned her on the island and demand a rightful place at his side. He's kind of like a crime boss. I really struggle with immersion in fantasy, and this book had me so immersed, like from the very beginning. I think there's something about like an ocean or like nature setting that feels a lot more immersive to me, because it's, I think, a really good way to very quickly orient a reader within your world. So to say, this is the way this world is like yours, and this is the way this world is unlike yours. And I think the fact that the story was so like trade heavy, like there's lots of like buying and selling and bartering going on, really just shows you how the world works so quickly. And as a result, I was super immersed immediately. There were some things in this book that confused me. For example, her age, like it probably said it at some point, but I have no idea how old this girl is, because I got the sense that she was really young when her father abandoned her, but then she is a full adult during the story, doing things that only a full adult should be doing as the story progresses. So like she definitely is an adult, but she doesn't seem like she was an adult when she was abandoned. It's very confusing, but that was far less important to me in this story than the fact that I felt really connected to it. And despite the fact I didn't fully understand the history, I was so immersed in the here and now, so to speak, that it really kept me going through the story. I absolutely binged this. There's really good found family vibes. There is a romantic thread that I don't think made the most sense, but again, that's due to the history rather than what's happening in the here and now. In the here and now, the romance thread developed really nicely to me. I do think that this book lacked a clear climax, but it did lead into book 2. Normally that really annoys me, but I think because of the way this book was paced, I was okay with it being a cliffhanger at the end. It is a duology, and I actually have since read the second book. It's got great pirate vibes. If you, like me, have lost hours to dreaming about being Elizabeth Swann, then maybe this book is for you. My second favorite book that I read during the month of June was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and I really resisted reading this book. I'm not a huge fantasy reader, which my top 3 this month is going to make you question that claim, but historically I've not been a huge fantasy reader, and I haven't read a ton of like fairy fantasy, at least not stuff that kind of reads like folklore, and this was my first foray into that. Actually, that's not true. My first place book of the month was my first foray into it, and it made me feel more confident reading this one, which I think kind of set the tune for a lot of fairy fantasy to come after. But The Cruel Prince is about Jude, who as a child, stick with me here, watched her half-sister's father kill her parents. So she shares a mother with her half-sister, and the father of her half-sister killed Jude's parents. So their shared mother and Jude's father, who are both mortals, but her half-sister's father is a Fae general. And he takes his daughter as well as Jude and her twin sister back to Fairy with him, raises them there. The story takes place when Jude is, I think, 17, and she wants to be a knight. But she has had to learn a lot and be really on her guard her entire life because being a mortal in Fairy is really difficult. The Fae don't like mortals that much, or when they do, it's to toy with them, so she has to constantly protect herself against charms and glamours and things like that, but also really respects him because she wants to be a knight. He's a general. But as political machinations start to unfold around her, she has to really quickly decide what she wants and who she wants to side with and support, and kind of find her own agency within that situation. But doing so comes with consequences. As a result, she ends up thrown together with one of the princes named Carden, who has been antagonistic to her. Like, some of his friends have actively tried to kill her and vice versa. But throughout this story, Jude really kind of makes decisions for herself, for better or worse, and the consequences of that play out really, really well. This is another fantasy, and this is going to be the theme of the day, where I was so easily immersed. I think part of that was because a lot of it borrowed from like common folklore, commonly known folklore, and the rest was kind of filled in a way that made sense. Similar to Fable, I didn't fully buy the history. Like, I didn't get a sense of like a historical antagonism between Jude and her classmates, for example. But what was happening in the here and now felt high stakes enough that I was able to look past that. I also think this book was a masterclass at being the first in a series and setting up well for the rest of the series, but also feeling satisfying in and of itself. There is a full-on story arc within this that also is open enough to future books. And I was so compelled to start reading the second book as quickly as possible. I'm actually reading it right now as I'm filming this. And I think that Jude is such a realistic character in the sense that she is a teenage girl, so she doesn't really know what she's doing all the time, but she is cunning and she does do her best, and the decisions that she makes have massive consequences, not just for her but for the entire kingdom, but she makes them anyway and she deals with the consequences. If you have heard about this book and you've been on the fence about reading it, I would highly encourage you to do so. I think it's really good. I think it's I was a little bit worried when people talked about it like reading like a fairy tale, that it was going to feel too abstract and too like sing-songy, but it's not like that at all. I would say it feels more contemporary in language than I expected. And 3 for 3 on the fantasy. My favorite book of the month, and probably my favorite book of the year so far, is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I can't stop grinning when I think about this book. It's so good. In this book, our titular character, Emily Wilde, is a dryadologist, and dryadology is like the study of the folk. And in this world, that is like a branch of academia. So everyone kind of commonly knows about this. And Emily is creating an encyclopedia of fairies, and so she's going from place to place and has been for years to study regional folk. And in this book, she is going to a fictionalized version of Iceland in order to study their very elusive folk. The book is written as her journal entries, and when she first gets there, she's really struggling both to get access to the folk and to make any headway there, but also with the locals. Emily is very autistic coded, I would say. It's not stated, but it's pretty heavily implied, and she's really struggling with the locals. And then her academic rival and only friend, Wendell Bamblebee, comes to town. If you saw my mid-year book freakout tag video, you know that I love Wendell Bamblebee. He is so good. Anyway, Wendell is very good with the townspeople. He's very good with the folk, because Emily suspects he might be folk himself. And the two of them are getting swept up into town stuff, swept up into Fae stuff, and it just crescendos very beautifully. I loved this book for two very different reasons. Actually, no, they're kind of the same reason. One is because, like the other two, I was so immersed. I just wanted to do nothing but read this book. I wanted to be in that world, and I felt in that world when I was reading. Even as it starts to get more and more fantastical, it still felt extremely immersive, very descriptive, but not in a heavy-handed way. I don't think that the journal format detracted from that at all. If anything, I feel like it added a really good point of characterization, because the way that Emily chooses to filter and frame her thoughts for the purposes of her journal are very telling to who she is as a character, and we don't lose any detail as a result. It just gives us more insight into who she is. And also there's one point where Wendell takes over her journaling because she's incapacitated, and it's very cute. The other reason why I really loved it, which I do think has contributed to the immersiveness, is the depth of the lore and the world building. Within these journal entries are footnotes. Like if she mentions, oh, this is similar to de Grey's theory of blah, 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 she'll have an asterisk with de Grey thought this, and this is what ended up happening to her, and all of this detail. And Heather Fawcett has clearly done so much world building that she's not only defined the things that are relevant to the actual story playing out, but she's also invented all of these academic theories and stuff like that. Like the world building is just so rich and detailed, and she's found ways to incorporate all of that detail into the story in a way that both makes sense for the character, because it's something that Emily would be interested in and would care about, but also that allows the reader to engage with it in a way that's comfortable to them. I know people who have read this book and said they skipped the footnotes and they missed nothing as a result. It doesn't impact the story to not have read the footnotes, but it impacts just the level of detail in the world building. And I personally loved it. I devoured the footnotes. I just am in awe of Heather Fawcett's mind as an author, and I think that added to the immersion within the story because it felt so robust. I love this book so much, and I cannot tell you how happy I am to have read a book that I loved that has a sequel, and the sequel is ready to go for me. The fact that that happened with all three of these books was fantastic. And like The Cruel Prince, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies wraps up nicely within the first book. In fact, I get the sense that she didn't necessarily think that there was going to be a second book when she wrote the first book. Like, I feel like it's a fully complete story, but I'm so excited for there to be more. I think there's a third book coming out in like January or February, already gone on the library waitlist for it. So yeah, those are my 3 favorite books that I read during the month of June. I hope you like this new format. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Weigh in on the whole negative reviews coming from authors thing. I'm really interested to hear what you think. Don't forget to pre-order You've Got Chainmail out on the 15th of August. Subscribe if you're not already. And I think that's it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.